Welcome everyone to this ISPA interview exploring the challenge of PSTN switch off for ISPs. I'm Sam Strover, member of the ISPA Council and Managing Director of Vostron, and I'm delighted to welcome Phil Laws, Senior Manager, CP and Stakeholder Engagement at the Openreach All IP Programme. Phil, do you want to give us a quick introduction about yourself before we delve into the topic?
Good afternoon, Sam. So yes, I'm Phil Laws. I'm part of the Openreach All IP Programme, and I lead on what we call industry engagement, which is talking to those sort of outside the normal communication provider communities, as well as managing the trials we have at the moment in Salisbury and Mildenhall.
Fantastic. So we've got a few questions, and we'll try and keep it brief today. But I think the first thing I'd like to understand a bit more about is how this PSTN switch off is going to affect vulnerable customers, and particularly in the event of a power failure. You know, what must we as CPs do to protect the vulnerable, and equally when we're looking after businesses, what should businesses and facilities managers do in relation to things like lift lines and fire systems, and where do the responsibilities lie?
So quite a wide-ranging question there, but I do have to say that virtually everybody we speak to in any of the sort of customer communities out there, they all speak about vulnerable customers, and whilst it might not be their business, everyone has a member of their family or someone they know who is vulnerable. And one of the things that I brought along with me when I did sort of face-to-face meetings is one of these, which is, oops, there you go, this is a health pendant. So we're very, very aware of the potential impact on the vulnerable. And whilst the vulnerable customers aren't customers directly of Openreach per se, we want to make sure clearly in terms of the end-to-end impact for them is understood. Now, what we do know is that Ofcom are very clear that from a customer protection point of view, communication providers should be able to identify their customers who are vulnerable and think about their particular needs. And vulnerability can take many forms. I think most people think of the old or the infirm with devices like those things I showed earlier on. And the question that we have typically, I think, is two things. One is that we talk about the All IP program as a move to sort of broadband or IP, and the vulnerable typically only want a simple telephone line. And it's to reassure them that what we're talking about is a similar type of offering, but delivered over broadband. So the messaging to end customers is quite important. And the second thing is these special devices or special services that are offered on top of the telephone line that we need to understand as an industry if these things will continue to work or not. Now, a lot of these devices are very old, sort of work on analog signaling, DTMF pulses and the like. And the question is, will they function? So we are working with the various industry associations, so TSA, UK Telehealth and the like, to understand how they can help us talk to their members and their communities to help us truly understand the requirements, but also to figure out specifically what we need to do as an industry. Now, in terms of enabling customers migration, so we have what's called a best practice guide that sort of tries to put in place sort of working arrangements. And clearly, it's very much on the communication provider who supplies services to that end customer to help figure out what their particular needs are. But from an Openreach point of view, we want to work with them and also special service providers to understand together how this thing is all going to hang together. So that's what I would say on the vulnerable customer point of view. We do understand, and I'm trying to ensure we do work across the whole of industry. Now coupled to that is this general question of things that are connected to our telephone lines that we don't necessarily know about. And again, a good example, a good old prop. I've got here a point of sale machine, and there's loads of these out there that are analog and will not continue to work. So we're trying our best to understand what these typical use cases are and to identify the appropriate industries through an association or the providers themselves to understand if they're aware of the program and to engage to understand if these devices will continue to function. And I do know that a number of communication providers have a test lab for that purpose, and Openreach is developing its own test lab that should be available for summer this year, where people can come and test all these devices against our strategic offerings. So from our point of view, in summary, we're out there trying our best to identify them and make sure people are aware, and then work with them to understand if and how these things will continue to function.
Okay, thank you very much. Have you got anything further to point out in relation to a loss of power in a building and how some of those additional services? Now, I mean, I appreciate that you have an alternative to some of the red care services that we may have deployed in the past, but still, in the event of a power loss in the building, is there a responsibility for us as CPs to be ensuring that UPS is in place and that you know sufficient levels of UPS is in place to protect these particular customers?
So it's a good point, and again, from a vulnerable customer point of view, and I should have mentioned that the requirement of Ofcom is that battery backup systems are available to vulnerable customers for free as part of their offering moving forward, and available to others to sort of purchase if they want them to function. You're quite right that the strategic products that we have, FTTP, the fibre to the cabinet-based solution, and SOTAP, our sort of transitional products, they all require local powering. All require powering for the router, and FTTP requires powering as well for the ONT. And I myself have a battery backup unit, and I sort of live end of a village, and we occasionally get power cuts, and it's very effective actually to have the confidence that things will continue to work in a power cut. I think particularly for the vulnerable, it's important because they're typically used to having services that do not go off in a power cut, and it's a reassurance for them. And the requirement is that battery backup should function for at least an hour. Now, working about the business side, it clearly depends on the nature of the business, and the lack of line powering, we know, impacts some utilities in terms of their monitoring. And again, we're working with them to figure out what alternatives there could be made available. But I think in terms of for critical businesses, certainly UPSs should be considered, I think, part of the norm moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Cheers. Just moving on to some of the other, it's a bit of a continuation from the last question, really, is about legacy services. And we've experienced some issues in the past trying to link in to using Prism video link services, and there's a whole raft of services that we would expect that Openreach were going to have some kind of long tail support on them, and that we may end up with a bunch of services rather like the BT IP Stream Connect product, which never ever got to end of life. Where do you guys sit on that?
So from an Openreach point of view, you mentioned some products there that we Openreach don't actually supply. All we know is that from an Openreach point of view, the PSTN is closing. It will impact all products. And again, reflecting on the earlier comment I made, is we don't always know how our products are being used. So we're trying to work across those various sectors to understand how they can be supported moving forward. But the key point is things like ISTN uses a secure communications mechanism for the prison service. The bottom line is, ISTN is going. It's as simple as that. We need to think about, right, what might the replacements be? And I know things like SIP trunking have been mentioned, but in that particular example, we'd be keen to work with suppliers of these services to actually understand, maybe help. I'm not quite sure how we can help, but it's offering ourselves to sort of help if we possibly can to figure out what the alternatives could be. And the message from you is, let's make sure we figure them out before December 2025. So absolutely, and just echoing that, the problem we are seeing, because we announced this through our consultation in May 2018 about our plans. It's nearly the 3-year anniversary. We have 4.5 years to go. So what I'd really encourage is for people to engage, to understand what's happening, to accept it's not going to go away. The safe assumption is the date will not change, and as far as we're concerned, that is the date. Have a good think now. Look at your customers. What lines do they have? Where are they? How are they impacted by the various stop sell rules? And think about those use cases. And some of these might need to be teased out. I think they aren't always evident, and by talking to end customers, this is where we'll get that very important feedback.
Great. And Phil, how are we to engage? How do we engage with Openreach on these issues?
So we have a number of routes. We have sort of the BAU route via normal account teams, depending upon the size of the communication provider. You might have your own account manager, or through one of the dedicated sort of account support teams. We also have, and we have done since the back end of 2018, an all industry are invited to attend those forums. So we can make sure that they are clear of our plan, and specifically take any questions that people have at the time. And one thing I would say is that not all communication providers want to sort of expose questions in an open forum. So that being the case, then obviously a bilateral discussion with ourselves is absolutely something that we would offer. Okay,
brilliant. Thank you. Finally, copper pairs. How are we going to identify them? How is all of this going to work after switch off? Are we expecting a new labeling scheme? How will we be matching a new labeling scheme to potentially incorrectly labeled old sockets set in a building? Will Openreach actually get around and exchange all sockets before December 2025? How's all of this going to work, and how are we going to work with some of the legacy services that we're still supporting, such as ADSL in certain areas? How are we going to work with the old infrastructure, and how does it work?
So I think there's two possible things here. One is the fact that there's no power on the line, and we have no dial tone. So from an Openreach engineering point of view, we have various handheld testers that we can use to understand if a line is actually working from a DSL point of view or not, or if it's a spare pair. I think in terms of questions around home wiring and the like, or existing legacy wiring around a building, I think the safe assumption would be to say that services are provided to the master socket, and essentially routers are connected at that point. And broadly, anything that does work today broadly won't work in the future. We do have a product called voice reinjection, or VRI, which is a way that some CPs can connect from the router back into existing wiring via a special cable, and that is something that CPs could consider. But from our point of view, broadly, we see services being presented to the master socket in the premise, then connected to a router, and broadly from that point on, it very much depends on the end customer requirement. I think we'll see in the residential properties, essentially the home wiring not used anymore. Now that might cause confusion in terms of what does or doesn't work at a socket, but the key thing it falls back to is that it's one master socket connected to one router, and it's from the router point that all services are therefore presented.
But in a premise where perhaps there are multiple master sockets presented off the DP, and perhaps some of those legacy sockets may not be labeled, or it may not be clear which line is which. Certainly, it's a relatively standard procedure for CPs to check a line is available using 17070 or similar. Obviously, that's not going to be available to them in the future. Is there going to be any way of identifying a line?
So it's not something that I've been asked before, to be honest with you. So I don't know is the honest answer. We can clearly take that away and think about it. But I think the safe assumption would be, if there's a working service, it's clearly at that socket. Any other socket, be a master or otherwise, that there's nothing working there.
Okay, great. And I mean, the same will go, I'm assuming, for line diagnostics or anything else. There's no power over the line. How do is there going to be any way of checking for noise on the line, or for a partially working line? How will that work?
So there are tests available on the various products. So FTTP and SIGIA and SOTAP when it comes along. They're normally extended through the B2B sort of gateways, where there's a standard set of tests. I don't know what they are. I haven't got the list, but there are recognised tests that can be performed. I mean, the good news is broadly with these new products is that things like noise don't tend to make a difference. Noise in an FTTP context in terms of optical noise is a different matter, but we don't broadly see those problems. So we see them as sort of, it's a fit and forget sort of network. It doesn't go wrong, and you just leave it there and it continues to function.
I think the concern from our side is that there may be some areas where we don't have some of the new services that we're talking of still may not be available. Is that not an issue that you envisage being an issue by December 2025 anyway?
In terms of product availability,
yeah.
So the strategy is every single endpoint or premise will have one of FTTP, SGIA, or SOTAP available to them by that point. I mean, clearly the first two are fab-based products and will give superior performance and availability. And SOTAP, say it's a transitional product, and it's simply there because we haven't yet managed to roll out fibre. As you will know, hopefully you'll all know, we've got significant FTTP rollout plans, 20 million premises by the sort of mid to late 20s. But it's just simply a case of there's so many to do, it's just a case of how quick we can get around them.
Great, and thank you, Phil. I think it's massively important that we keep the dialogue open between ISPs, CPs, and Openreach over these next couple of years. So, we look forward to hearing much more from you. Keep the dialogue going, and hopefully we'll be seeing you again soon.
And so thanks from me, Sam. You're more than welcome, and obviously happy to work with ISPA on a moving basis for the future. Thank you very much.